Awesome. Great. Well, welcome everybody. It's great. Actually, almost a third breakdown across this. That's great. So let's get into it. So we're talking about the augmented reality tour that we're calling the Thámien Ohlone AR tour. And sorry. Try the clicker. All right. So all of us here are familiar with our campus, and so as you've probably noticed, the mission is the center geographically, metaphorically of our campus, right? We're the only institute of higher education that has, in California, that has a Spanish colonial mission on the campus, and so that offers some interesting possibilities in terms of the teaching that we do, in terms of the work that we do across the kind of student, faculty, staff divide, and so on. But one of the things, that for me, especially as an archaeologist, as a historical anthropologist, is thinking about, well, what did the mission, what really was the mission, right? Those of us that grew up in California, those of us that live in California, the missions kind of permeate the landscape, right? We got, Mission Santa Clara in the center of our campus. You go to those of us that are older enough to remember the old school Taco Bells. Those were in Mission Revival. Architecture, pretty much everywhere you look in California, you're reminded in some way of the missions. But just to orient us here at Mission Santa Clara, founded in 1777, there were 5 sites. It's very convoluted from the archaeological point of view, 3 of which are on our campus. The other 2 are out underneath the airport probably. And one of the things that we try to really highlight in this work is that the missions were not simply or not really at all colonial places. There were only ever 2 people who had ever, at a time, that had ever stepped foot on the European continent at a particular California mission, and those were the Franciscans. There were a handful of colonial soldiers and their families. Many of those people had diverse backgrounds, but came up from what's today Mexico. But at any given time, there would have been 1,300 or 1,400 Native people living here at the mission. All told, some 9,000 people were baptized over the course of the mission period, which lasted officially until 1836, but there were Native people here into the 1860s, as we say in the slide. And, of course, the early baptisms were from local Ohlone groups or tribes, and then over time, mission recruitment pushed out into the Central Valley and up near the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, where Sacramento is today. And so these would have been folks speaking Miwok and Yokuts languages. And one of the really important things to also acknowledge is that missionization took a terrible toll. Of the 9,000 baptisms, some 7,600 Native people died here at Mission Santa Clara. All right. So given that this is a very complex history involving any number of indigenous Native Californian tribes, Europeans, folks coming up from Mexico, how do we tell this complex story, especially in thinking about how it fits in local Native histories? And so one of the things that, in my classes, taking students out to walk around the campus, look at the way we tell this story, is that, historically, we haven't done a great job at Santa Clara. So when you are out walking around, you may notice that there's, different ways that we commemorate the mission. There's the mission itself, which is a reconstruction from 1926. When they rebuilt it, they built it twice as big as it originally was. So there's that aspect, right? The historical markers in front of the mission church, there's a big granite block that was put by the California State Department of Parks and Recreation, essentially the historic markers that you might see all around the state. That doesn't mention Native people at all. If you go out to the site of what we call the third mission complex, which is out by the entrance kiosk, you might see a giant wooden cross and some interpretive, or at least some plaques and stuff. One of those plaques doesn't even mention Native people by name. It says that the plaque is dedicated to Father Murguia, who built that particular, or oversaw the construction of that particular mission complex, because of course Native people were doing the building. And then it says, and the many dwellers that lived around the mission. So who are these dwellers, right? So they're kind of this obfuscating language. And then there are a handful of, on the right, these interpretive plaques that were put up in the 90s as part of the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. And of the 5, I think, that are on campus, only 1 really mentions Native people and is fairly, simple, let's say. And if you can't read it, this particular one has been since replaced, but at one point somebody texted me. I was walking from the Caltrain station today, and I noticed that the sign was edited. And so you might see in white out there, it says Ohlone people in the Santa Clara Valley were enslaved. That's no longer there, but that was there for a brief moment. So, we have this complex history. We're not doing a great job telling it, in my opinion, but what's the so what, right? Well, the so what is that because of what happened here at the missions, Native people in California whose ancestors were in these missions today are not, by and large, considered legitimate American Indian groups or American Indian tribes by the United States federal government. And so what that means is it sets up this kind of two-tiered system of, second-class tribes in California simply because their ancestors had, or were brought into the missions during the Spanish colonial period. So if you look at this map, California actually has 110 federally recognized tribes. It's out of 574 federally recognized tribes nationally. We've got almost 20% of all tribes in the country, which is amazing. California is Indian country in that sense. But when you look at the distribution of the federally recognized tribes where the dots are, they're not where the missions were. So this line is kind of the extent of the mission impact. And San Diego County is a little bit of an outlier because of the arid conditions there. Native people weren't forced to live at the missions the way they were elsewhere. But otherwise, you'll see there's only 2 tribes in the main kind of southern to central coast of California whose ancestors were in the missions who are today federally recognized. That's the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash down in the Santa Barbara area and the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria up in Marin. And they only had their federal recognition restored in the year 2000. So there's this kind of historical inequity. And, Alfred Kroeber was kind of the grandfather of anthropology out here in California. As a grad student, I spent 7 years in the basement of Kroeber Hall. So I felt like it's my duty to try to undo some of this in my kind of colonial educational legacy. So, in his kind of landmark Handbook of the Indians of California, he's basically saying that tribes whose ancestors were in the missions don't exist anymore. And for us, on this project, this is the kind of thing we're trying to counteract. Because, of course, here in the Bay Area, the Ohlone people are still here today, very much so. Depending on where you live in the Bay, there's multiple different kind of parts of the Ohlone community. So if you live in San Francisco, it might be the Ramaytush or the local group. If you live in the East Bay, it might be slightly different. Here in our area, one of the main tribes and really the largest tribal organization of folks whose ancestors were at Mission Santa Clara, Mission San Jose, and Mission San Francisco is called the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe. And so that's our main partner in this project. And this is a scene from a Ohlone youth camp that has been on our campus the last 2 years and will be on our campus again this summer. And this is Isabella Amne Gomez, who's the first, as far as we know, Ohlone student to ever attend Santa Clara. So very exciting for us as a university to be able to kind of start to right some of the historical wrongs. And so on that note, moving into more of like the content of what are we actually doing, this project is based in the technology of augmented reality to intervene in the commemorative interpretive landscape in different ways, right? If you go out and you look at the landscape, there's the reconstructed church, there's these placards, there's big monuments, big granite blocks and stuff. That's got a lot of inertia, right? I've worked here 15 years. I don't think I could get a big granite block installed somewhere. Even the signs and that kind of thing are kind of difficult, right? So augmented reality, in some ways, is an interesting kind of intervention because it exists virtually. And Danielle and Kai will also tell you about all the other cool things augmented reality can do. And just to kind of wrap up my part, one of the other parts of this is that in 2019, I guess, before he left, Father Eng, who was president of the university at that time, convened what was called the Ohlone History Working Group. And so, Father Eng was a historian of California, and he was, interested in thinking about how do we tell the story of the mission on campus. So there was a working group convened. I was on it. Other faculty and staff from Santa Clara were on it. And importantly, representatives from the Ohlone community were also part of this. And we spent about a year going through all the markers and monuments and thinking about what we could do differently. And so you can find this report online. It's pretty thorough about what we've said about the mission past, about the Native past on our campus, and also what we can do to enhance that narrative. And so we kind of see our work, the impetus for our work, as kind of stemming from this call from the Ohlone community to do something different here at Santa Clara. And I'll pass it on to Danielle.
Thank you. So, what many of you might be wondering if you haven't seen anything related to the tour before is, what is this? Because a lot of people have experienced different levels of augmented reality. Not everybody has even experienced any level of augmented reality. So looking at it and thinking about, like, what is this thing? What does it actually look like? And how are we trying to use it to make a difference? Let's see if the video will play.
Several Santa Clara University departments partnered with Ohlone tribes once native to the land this campus is on to bring their stories to life with the use of augmented reality on cell phones.
For thousands of years, our ancestors called Thámien home.
The Thámien Ohlone AR tour transforms the SCU campus back to what it was thousands of years ago. 3 stops on the tour were launched Monday, but soon visitors will be able to scan QR codes across campus to learn the stories that these tribe members want people to never forget.
Akoy, Horpe, Thámien, Growam. Welcome to the center of Thámien village. For thousands of years, our ancestors called Thámien home. Once an oak woodland with year-round water sources, this village likely had 300 to 500 native inhabitants.
Our people were forced to work long hours plowing fields, digging irrigation ditches, slaughtering cattle, and constructing mission buildings, all to keep the mission system running. Some tribal members also held leadership positions as intermediaries between the Native Californians and the Franciscan clergy.
In recent years, our tribe collectively renamed the Mission Santa Clara cemeteries in our ancestral Chochenyo language. In order to honor our ancestors buried here, the new name means where the Clareño Indians are buried. This cemetery holds the remains of approximately 2,400 indigenous people out of the total 7,600 native individuals who are listed in the mission's burial records.
Every year, this location right here, the St. Ignatius Lawn, becomes a vibrant hub for the powwow at Santa Clara University, featuring traditional food, music, and dance. Listen carefully, and you can hear a sacred healing song in our Chochenyo language, as it was sung by Jose Guzman, our Ohlone ancestor, and recorded on a wax cylinder back in the 1930s.
Okay. So now we have to hear it again. All right. So yes, and then try the slideshow again here. And we'll go past it. Nope. We will not. There we go. Impact and creators. Okay, so in a lot of ways, we're when we first started talking about this, we thought about it as a hidden history, but it's not hidden to the Ohlone people, of course, because they lived it and they continue to keep that memory alive. So we looked at how we could make the most impact with augmented reality, and we looked at it in terms of our social impact, both on campus and with our tribal partners, our educational impact, and our research impact. In terms of social impact, this project has been extremely rewarding. We have a huge team. We have many partners within the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe. At the moment, these are kind of the key players that we're working with. We have Gloria Gomez, Monica Arellano, Isabella Amne Gomez. As mentioned before, she's our first recipient of the Ohlone Youth Scholarship here on campus. And then her younger sister, Gigi Gomez, and Lucas Arellano. And Gigi and Lucas are still in high school. and they are working on a stop themselves. We're working with them to co-design things, and a lot of this is about co-design, working back and forth between the tribe and our students here to create hopefully rewarding, immersive, and informative experience. So here on our side, you have the 4 faculty involved, and then we have this student team. And some of our students are undergraduates, some of them are grad students. We have a PhD student, first PhD students working with us, and building this team of interdisciplinary students has also been great to see. An English major working really closely with an engineering major, building a relationship that they may not have had if they hadn't been working on this shared goal to create this project together. And I have seen a huge growth among the students as well. We've been trying to include them, make sure that they get opportunities to present their work at conferences, to have that sort of truly academic experience that might serve them well later in their education when they go beyond undergraduate into graduate school or from graduate school to PhD. The most important thing, though, is the relationships that are being built, just the friendships and how everyone is working together is really, it's really nice to feel that we're doing something that is making a difference, and we're hearing back from our tribal partners that that is what's happening. And more people are interested in getting involved. The more we show this, the more we have information from different tribal members who are interested in becoming part of it, which helps diversify the voice. One thing that we have to be careful of is it's a very colonial kind of Western narrative to have a single person who's telling a story, right? You have the storyteller, you have the leader, you have the single person. But in Native communities, things are largely done with a group, right? There's a tribal council, there's a large group of people, and making sure that we're highlighting multiple voices is very important, and that we are being mindful that everyone's experience is different, right? Being Ohlone is part of their identity, but is not the whole be-all and end-all of their identity. One thing I wanted to mention, we do have another stop that we completed that launched on Indigenous Peoples Day this year. We have our new basket weaving stop with Mandy Green. She's a member of 2 different tribes and is related to the Ohlone tribe. And because her second tribal membership, or it's actually her first, is with a different tribe, she has this access to basket weaving technology that a lot of our Ohlone partners didn't have access to without this connection. So that's another way we're trying to help reconnect people who are related, but make sure that they have those accesses to the different technologies that may have been lost through colonial intervention. I guess I'll call it colonial intervention. And then Isabella speaking on the impact might. Small clip of this due to time.
Californians, current Santa Clara student and member of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe, Isabella Amne Gomez says recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day is a step forward.
These things are helpful to restore and heal our community and to heal the generational trauma that we've endured. But it also serves to show that there's still a lot of work to be done, not only here, but in the Bay Area as a whole.
Part of that work is to highlight that these tribe members are still here, and the university is using technology
to make it happen. See if we can get it to advance without playing again.
Californians, current Santa Clara student and member of the Muwekma.
One moment. So we'll just move past it. And back to the slideshow. Okay, so social impact. Right now we have 5 stories told, not 4. And on the beta launch, 4 TV news stations from the area covered it. We had 331 tour visits on our launch day in Indigenous Peoples Day 2023, more on Indigenous Peoples Day this year. And as of September 10th, we had 8,000 plus unique views, or we think they might be unique. We don't know. We're trying to parse through the data, how many of these views are unique. And obviously, that was in September. Here we are in January. We've got a lot more views since then. So it's exciting to see it grow and see it get out there and see people interact with this history that prior to this your experience of this history may be nothing, right? Without those plaques and those signs and those granite blocks that Lee was talking about, we don't really have any markers of this. So making sure that, at the very least, this history is getting out there somehow. In terms of education, lots of our students are being impacted by this. Obviously, we have 11 people working on the team who are students. So 11 students are getting the chance to closely work with this historical information, work with the tribe, get their feet wet in terms of different areas of the production, whether it's actually building things or development, but also writing, recording history, doing interviews, marketing, all of these things that connect everyone together here at Santa Clara. And this is our team from last year. Some of these folks have graduated, but they're all still friends, and that's really lovely too. So really nice seeing some of the co-creation moments. And when I was speaking before about access to different things, the basket weaving stop was made during the summer camp. There's an Ohlone youth summer camp held here, hopefully every year now. We're working on that. It's happened twice. We're about to do our third year this year. And it's giving access to a lot of the youth members to some of the elders that they don't necessarily have ready access to, because they either had to move away due to cost of living or due to parental circumstances, and this gives them an opportunity to return to the homeland and also return to a community that they don't always have immediate access to. So, all right. In the future, we're hoping, we did talk to the DSSA docents at their training and meeting this past summer, and we're hoping to kind of use the connection to the fourth grade mission field trips to build more interest and get more of this history to people at an earlier age, because I think a lot of people, I don't come from California, so I didn't have the experience of the mission project, but anybody who comes from California remembers it very, very well and will talk to you about what mission they built out of sugar cubes or whatever. So it has a lasting impact on the students in a way that I'm not even sure people realize how much everyone remembers that particular unit of their history in fourth grade. And if we can maybe illuminate the fact that there are two sides to that history and tell a broader story, I think it would go a long way in helping with some of the societal ills that we are suffering from. So, and of course, we get to co-design with Ohlone youth partners. We're hoping to broaden that and include more of the Ohlone youth in our research and in the creation. And now I shall turn to Guy.
Thank you, Danielle. I was one of those Californian fourth graders who made a mission out of sugar cubes. So it's nice to come full circle and be able to tell, in particular, many of the people who come to see the mission on our campus, including those fourth graders, about, hey, you might be here to see the mission building, but you can scan this QR code and then see this alternate perspective on what happened on this land. I wanted to talk a little bit about the research impact as well, in particular from a human-computer interaction perspective, which is my field within the discipline of computer science, and it sits kind of at this intersection of novel technologies such as augmented reality, as well as design and art, and incorporating social sciences or humanities too. And so one of the research angles that we're particularly interested in here is how we can innovate novel co-design methods to collaborate with communities, and in particular marginalized communities, to create location-based augmented reality experiences. And so, as pictured here, one of those was to print out a giant map of our campus, which is really our canvas for this work, and then use post-it notes, which if any of you come from kind of a design or user research background, you might recognize the term affinity diagramming, where you put a lot of post-it notes on the wall and cluster them to identify themes or key takeaways from a process of research. And so we're doing kind of a similar thing here, but doing it spatially. So locating each of those post-it notes on a map, and the post-it notes here, the pink ones, are different media assets that we have access to, whether those are Ohlone songs or 3D models of different Ohlone buildings. You saw earlier the Thule houses in one of the augmented reality tour stops. And then the blue are the different messages or stories that might be located at different sites across the campus. And so far we've been able to realize 5 of those stops, but we have a broader vision for getting to about 20 eventually. And this is our co-design process to create that experience together. And it is intended as a kind of welcoming design process that allows anyone to participate in imagining the future of the augmented reality tour. And it's not just looking at a code editor. We published on this at the primary conference in the field of human-computer interaction. Actually, our submission there included the video that we showed earlier because, as Danielle was describing, people have various interpretations of what augmented reality even is. It's still kind of a format or medium that's very much in flux, and so we found that video is super helpful to help people actually understand what we mean when we say augmented reality, and people can then picture what we're actually creating. We also had students come and present at the primary industry conference on augmented reality and virtual reality. In particular, actually, we had Isabel and Cynthia, our project lead from last year, present there to an industry audience to really broaden horizons there as to the potential for this technology beyond just purely commercially motivated use. And then finally, I think we're aiming to build a research community around this idea of how can we create location-based augmented reality experiences that tell stories from different communities whose stories have been traditionally marginalized. And so at the last CHI conference, we organized this with participants from around the world who are working with all kinds of different communities, Indigenous, Black communities in Seattle, and rural communities, to think about how this medium, which can be overlaid on top of any location or site, often without permission of the owners who may or may not endorse the message of what's being shared there, and how that technology can be leveraged in this way. And so as a next step then, our intention is to really create what we're calling a toolkit, an augmented reality toolkit for social justice tours, which would be a guide and set of resources that can empower educators and storytellers worldwide to create these alternative tours that challenge some of the traditional hegemonic narratives. Some of the recognition we've received in this regard, we're very grateful to the Whittam grant, which we've received now twice, one of the supports for interdisciplinary research that Santa Clara University offers. Our video won the Best Video Award at the CHI conference, and then we've also been recognized on the industry side as presenting that presentation at the AWE conference and receiving an award from Niantic, which is probably the leading augmented reality company in the world right now. They are famously the makers of the Pokemon Go game, which is probably the most widely used augmented reality experience today, and we're actually building on top of their technology. So the idea again here is we don't need to invent all of the technology ourselves, but we are innovating around what is a novel and meaningful use of this technology on our site. I wanted to dive into a little bit of why we might use augmented reality as a medium here, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so one is to envision a more just future. This was inspired in part by the Dear Visitor augmented reality experience at Stanford University, which recognizes the experience of Chanel Miller, a sexual assault survivor there. And she actually had wanted a plaque installed at the university to recognize her experience. The university initially refused, and so they created it in augmented reality. And interestingly enough, after that attracted a lot of media and campus attention, the actual physical plaque was installed at a very similar site with her actual quote. And so I think that's one potential hopeful outcome. I think the virtual object or augmented reality experience itself has value. But sometimes it can also lead to a change on the physical landscape or those granite blocks that, as Lee described, are very difficult to actually make changes to or require a lot of community engagement and motivation to change. And so what might that look like here? Well, one of the things that we've discussed and are still potentially going to go forward with in augmented reality would be a statue that would recognize Ohlone dance traditions. So, we could have something like that that could be prototyped at least in augmented reality initially before maybe being used to advocate for a physical statue as well. We can also reach more people, of course, through augmented reality. So one of the inspirations for our augmented reality experience is the Race and Slavery Walking Tour at the University of Alabama, led by Professor Hillary Ann Green. And she documents how that campus was built in large part by slave labor. But she's only one woman, so she can only offer this tour a couple of times each year. Whereas, if we offer something like our augmented reality app, it can be offered to many different visitors at different times of the year. And so that's what we've currently now released on the App Store is our Ohlone AR tour. And finally, of course, there's rapid improvement in the technology itself. So I mentioned before, Pokemon Go is used by tens of millions of users worldwide, and that's, this mobile augmented reality is the current form factor that we're using. I would say it's still a little bit awkward. You have to, hold your phone up in the air and wave it around like a crazy person. But we're soon coming to something that's going to be a much more sleek form factor. Of course, there's also worse form factors. So this was 1999, the original Mars backpack system for location-based AR, which I do not wish upon anyone. But this was research in the field of human-computer interaction. And then, we've moved towards HoloLens, which is used primarily in industrial and manufacturing settings, to these kind of heavier headsets like the Apple Vision Pro that was released last year, to, I think, now what's coming are more actually wearable augmented reality glasses. And so this year we're going to experiment with releasing the first version of our Ohlone Augmented Reality Tour on a pair of AR glasses. They're still at this moment in time stupidly expensive. They cost about $4,000 each, and they have to be tethered to not a backpack, but a small sort of computing puck. So they're not at all ready for sort of mass adoption. That's where we're still, using mobile AR because that's where people are today. But we can see that, perhaps in 5 years or so, these types of devices will be more widespread. And as a, project where we're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in our research, that's a good place to be so that we can really think about, well, beyond the obvious sort of commercial or gaming uses that are going to come out of this, what are some of the meaningful social impact that this new technology wave might have? So yeah, I think we're headed towards some sort of mass market AR headset in the midterm, perhaps. Some of the open questions, particularly on the research side, would be, how can the co-design process support community building? So I think Danielle mentioned that, these social relationships that come out of this project are one of the really core contributions of the work. And I think co-design is often seen as we get the community together and we go through some sort of co-design process like putting Post-its on the map, and then we build a technological artifact, and that's the sort of contribution or takeaway. And instead, we're interested in, how can that process and that artifact contribute back to the community itself, bring members of the community together, teach them skills, or even, help them record songs that are valuable to them. These are all, things that we're working on as part of this project that I think could really be one of the main contributions, or perhaps the primary contribution beyond the actual app that we're creating right now as the Augmented Reality Tour. And then secondly, how can we create that toolkit that empowers others to create location-based AR tours for social justice? And so we're currently opening up some conversations with other folks who have similar ideas for other sites and have important perspectives or communities to work with and share stories there. to see what are some of the obstacles or barriers to doing this kind of work. What lessons might we take away from our own work here that we could share with others? What sort of code snippets or other resources can we provide to them to enable them or empower them to do something similar? So we currently have 5 stops that we've created, and we have about 15 more planned. We also have the app now available in the Apple App Store. So if you search for Ohlone on the App Store, you can download it. It's also coming soon for Android. So with that, thank you very much, and we'd like to take your questions.
So when you have a question, I'll sort of field it to you guys. You guys can kind of, I suppose, decide amongst yourselves who's ballpark. All right, yes.
So like Lee, I take my students on a walking tour and we go through the historical markers. And so this last quarter in the fall, we used the AR tour. And so the questions or comments I have is, one, I noticed in the video there were sandwich boards with QR codes, and my students all noted, well, how is anybody supposed to know about this if they're walking around because the markers don't say anything? So are there plans for that? And second, I had 23 or so students, and about half couldn't get it to load when we were all trying to do it at the same time. So I guess that's more just a feedback that we were struggling, and if maybe, now there's an app, maybe if we had loaded the app and had it available and running, it could have been easier, but like on the fly, about half my students couldn't engage with it when we were doing it, which was a bummer, and I just was curious if that's a EduRoam thing, or like multiple using at once, or something I could have done better to prepare, because I'd like to keep doing it.
Thank you very much for that feedback.
This is emerging technology,
really so yeah,
I was excited to use it.
So for background on sort of the development process, we started with a web augmented reality experience where you went to a particular URL and then it opened up in the browser. That we found, as you report, is finicky. So for me as well, it worked maybe 50% of the time, maybe less. And so over the summer, we actually transitioned to this native app. And actually, you can direct your specific feedback to Kiki here, who is a PhD student working on the project. And we're doing a lot of work to improve that kind of basic user experience. But I will report that we've done a bunch of testing for this new iPhone version, and the success rate, I would say, is 90% plus now. So
well, then I
we're getting better.
Do that.
We're getting
that's
better.
Fine. Yeah, we use the app version, the web version. So
defer to Lee for the question about sort of discoverability of the tour. And
well, I think now if you download the app ahead of time, you should. If you direct your student, you're trying to do it in a class setting, you have them download it before. I mean, we've been working on versions of this, kind of thing for Amy, Luke, and I have for a number of years. Probably at least, before the pandemic, but that's like where my memory ends. And we've been told on multiple occasions that QR codes just aren't a possibility, at least permanent ones. But yeah, I think the sandwich boards were either for Indigenous Peoples Day or powwow, probably. So we have twice a year we try to launch a new stop. One in the fall, Indigenous Peoples Day, one in the spring with powwow, and that's when we can have a little bit more stuff out.
And just context, it's for the public history class, so they're thinking about how the public is engaging, and had lots of comments, as I'm sure you've gotten from your own students, of the other existing didactic panels we have on campus about what's said there. They were excited to see something else. I said, but how would anyone find it, right? So that was the kind of fun.
That's one of the exciting things for me working here is if it was already perfect, we'd have less to teach about.
Totally.
Truly, that is one of the things we're hoping for when we talk about the virtual informing the physical, that maybe we can't change those granite blocks, but maybe we can get QR codes. Yeah. That would be amazing.
Yeah, also I think we're working with Chelsea, who's our marketing lead for this project, to establish something at the admissions or visitor center there on campus for those tour groups, as well as potentially with the DESA docents, which, those are sort of key entry points on campus, and potentially even with the church to, have something inside there that would direct people towards this perspective on the campus.
Well, it's very cool. Thank you.
Hi. This is so important, and it really means so much to me. I really appreciate it. I have 2 questions. One, do you have any idea of the population of Ohlone in this area? And also, are you able to get it out to the large mass of people, this program? And also, do you know if other tribal groups throughout the United States are doing similar things, and is there interaction between this program and those programs?
Yeah, so the first question, the Ohlone community it's complicated because it's a colonial imposed name, so where do you draw the line exactly? But so the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe that we work with counts over 600 enrolled tribal members. And so as I mentioned, there's probably at least a half dozen of, just in the Bay Area alone, of different, Ohlone organizations. So I don't know, probably off the top of my head, maybe 1,000 people total. But the other question of, how does this interact with broader efforts? I mean, so we've been talking to folks at San Diego State. There's a colleague of mine, Meg's at Santa Cruz, Martin Rizzo Martinez, who's working with tribes over there to build something similar at Mission Santa Cruz. So there are these efforts. I don't know that they're fully linked yet. That would be a good, we were just talking to folks at the NEH yesterday about, or someday, about trying to think about how to get funding for this, and so maybe there is a bigger regional kind of thing that could work. And then nationally there's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, different tribes are doing all sorts of things in this realm, and we've been in discussions. There's like a American Indian and Alaska Native Tourism Association. The acronym is IANTA. They have all sorts of cool stuff if you look at their website. And so, they've at different points, talked about could we, highlight that through their organizations, or highlight our tour through their organizations.
I just want to make a comment, and I'm going to start weird, but I'm actually going to make it relevant, I hope. There's a famous story that when Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, he was terrified for 3 or 4 days because he thought he'd plagiarized. And it's because the song was so great, it seemed like it already existed. And I had a similar feeling when I saw this. This is such an amazing thing, and it's so Santa Clara, and I kind of felt relief and like, finally, we're doing this. And I just can imagine how much work you all put into that and are still putting into it. I mean, this is just, it's an unbelievably beautiful example to me of how Santa Clara can make the world a better place. And I just want to thank you.
Here you go.
Congratulations, this is great work. I was wondering, and this might be sort of a tertiary question, but how does a group, a Native American group, get federally recognized?
How much time do you have? So the 20-second version is there's 2 pathways. One through the BIA, which is very bureaucratic and can take decades. The other is through an act of Congress, which just takes a lot of money. So with our tribal partners, Muwekma Ohlone Tribe, they've been working on the restoration of federal recognition since the 80s. They kind of hit a roadblock in the BIA process, and it's just a very political thing because, even though we think, we're in the Bay Area, there's a lot of progressive politics, people should be supporting tribes, the question of, land in the Bay Area, the question of casinos, and that kind of thing is very, very dicey real quickly. So it's a political hot potato for sure. But so it's a hard thing for tribes. And there's lots and lots. I think in California alone, I forget the exact number, but somewhere between 50 and 60 tribes who are actively seeking one way or another federal recognition of as our tribal partners would say, the restoration of federal recognition, because prior to 1927. Their ancestors did have, relationship with the U.S. federal government.
Thank you.
Any further questions? So if you would then... Oh, no, I am seeing further questions. Yes.
This is so awesome. I'm taking a bunch of notes. Could the 3 of you speak to something that may have really surprised you in the process of this work as you developed this and your tribal partners and all the rest of this? I mean, you guys are really heavily informed people. It'd be interesting to know if anything took you by surprise. And maybe nothing did.
I'm continually surprised by how complex tribal relations are, not just with us, but between the different tribes. And it's one of the key parts of our work is that we really want to involve a broad perspective, and we are trying to be very neutral and walk the line of politics, and also still, not upset anyone, and and keep everything fair and equal and just as much as possible. So that has been interesting. It has been tricky. It makes the process perhaps longer than if we were to just farm this out to some like separate company that's not actually talking to the Ohlone people. And, you know, that could be something to get it done really quick, but it would be nowhere near as rewarding and nowhere near as rich and true.
And I think if anybody reads the newspapers, they know what you're talking about. It can get hot.
I think on my end, when you said this is so Santa Clara, that resonated with me as a relative baby here, having been here for just 2 years or so now. Because a lot of my prior research that was mentioned in the introduction around studying how users interact with social media like Facebook and Twitter was really studying users as a commodity, in the sense that we would have users come in, try out different versions of apps, and it would be a one-off relationship, and that would be it. Whereas on this project, it's been a wonderful experience to really get to know Monica, Gloria, Isabel, Gigi, Lucas, and others who are integral to the design and creation of this experience, because this really is their stories. And so building that relationship over the past 2 years has been so rewarding, as well as with the other faculty on the project, stepping outside of my disciplinary bubble of computer science. And one thing that I found surprising in that process was when we started speaking with our tribal partners, was I think we had initially perhaps envisioned something that would really focus on some of the dark and harrowing history of the quasi-enslavement of Ohlone and other Native peoples here at the mission. And that is certainly a part of the story, but they were very clear that they didn't want that to be the whole story. It also should be a story of the resilience of the tribe, of their, celebrating their culture. And so stops like the powwow or the basket weaving technology stop that we just introduced, and others still to come, I think really play that role of celebrating Ohlone culture today, not just acknowledging some of the wrongs that have been committed here too.
I would just add that I'm surprised by how slow it is, but also how that's important to go slow with this kind of thing. Because it's like Kai saying, it's one thing if we just slap something together and be like, oh, here's the story, but it's not our story to tell. Like, we're facilitating the story being told. So I think, especially when you're working with, communities like, the tribes, you really have to, even if it means you're not going to get the product out, or, all of us being faculty, like get the, under the pressure of, getting paper out or whatever the product is. But I think in this kind of community-centered work, you really have to go slow, have the extra meetings to make sure that you're doing it right. And then, to the this is so Santa Clara point, it's also the kind of thing, and even NEH people told us, you would have a better shot at getting funding if you just said, we're going to hand off the content to somebody else, a private contractor, and they'll develop it. But I feel like at Santa Clara, that's missing a huge opportunity for education, and we, the fact that we're using students, we're not using that sounds the fact that we're hiring students, the fact that we're engaging students, but then that's also part of the process, and that they're getting useful experience not just in the tech side or the research side, but also in this community-based type of project. So that's we should leverage that slowness to our advantage at Santa Clara.
First over here.
So there's been recent calls in critical Indigenous studies to kind of alter the methodological parameters of different disciplines based on Indigenous epistemologies or Indigenous ways of understanding the world. And I'm wondering if in your interactions with the community at the kind of like design stage, whether or not that's impacted the way that, say, some of the AR technology as a method of doing something, computer science or creating something, has changed in any way.
I think maybe that harkens back to the slowness that Lee was talking about, where a lot of projects, it's kind of more, the design phase is more discrete, and you do a big design session, you bring the community together one time, and then you hand off to sort of the tech team, and there's kind of a, path over the wall, if you will. And I think one of the things that we've really tried to do now is engage the Ohlone community in all parts of that process and make it iterative. And so we're doing bi-weekly co-design sessions with Gigi and Lucas, who are very interested in learning how to code and design. So not just thinking of like, we're going to record them telling a story and then we're going to bring it to life for them, but they're actually intimately involved in like scanning the abalone shells that were shown in one of the stops there, learning to code in Unity, which is required for AR tour development. And I think that both makes the technological artifact that we're creating at the end of the day a richer one, a more community-informed one, and also hopefully gives back to the community in the sense that we're developing some of those skills. When Monica approached us about that, she had initially said, well, I wanted to send my daughter to a summer camp, about CS, but it's quite expensive, and she's going to learn to program some Pac-Man game or something like that. And instead, through this process, then she gets to engage with stories from her own culture, her own community, and realize those in technology with coaching from some of the amazing undergraduate and graduate students that we have on the project in these bi-weekly sessions. And so I think that's one way we're still navigating this tension or this challenge of working with communities around a new and novel technology. But that's, I think, one way that we're approaching it right now.
I think if Amy were here, she would probably use the word affordances because that's something they say in the English department. But she would say that the affordances, I think, of augmented reality allow you to tell the story in a different way, right? Like, our kind of Western concept of the historical progression of, this place we call home is, Native people lived here for X, number of thousands of years, depending on how you want to frame it. Then the Spanish were here for 70 years, Mexican, and so on and so forth. And it's a very linear story. You can tell the story of Santa Clara, you tell the story of the mission in that way. But instead, through augmented reality, we can break that narrative up and, and layer it in different ways. And I think as Danielle was saying, what we found is that positionality is super important to the community. They want to be able to tell the story from the perspective of, different ages, gender, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think one of the things that Amy always, that sticks with us is one of our first visioning sessions of this was over Zoom in the middle of the pandemic. And, one of the Ohlone guys we're talking to is like, to me, the most Ohlone thing is skateboarding and McDonald's. And so, that is kind of blows that linear amount of, time perspective out of the water. So how do you tell that story? And I think AR is a way you can do that in a way that, traditional historical interpretation can't.
I'll add as a medium, there's, a lot of power, I think, in this location-based or land-based, connected to sort of land-based indigenous storytelling, where a lot of stories reference like the mountain over there or this particular tree. And so in augmented reality, then we can tell stories that are situated at a particular site on our campus and connect it to the natural environment around you as you're hearing that narrative being shared.
And that's so central to the tribe as well, is the land. The land is very important, whether it's the historical ownership of the land, the stewardship of the land, but the connection to the land is critical. So that's one of the main reasons that this works so well as an augmented reality experience, is because it's about the place and having it anchored here in very specific places.
Yeah, so like one of the things you'd mentioned was like kind of with or without permission, like putting up AR experiences in places where, if someone wants to suppress history, just do it anyway. So I was wondering, is it easier or like are other processes for getting permissions and things with providing an AR experience in a location different from if you were going to do it just physically?
It's an interesting question that I think is still largely unresolved. There's a case, legal case that's currently under review where I think Pokemon Go led a lot of people onto a site that was protected, and the owner of that site is suing the company for leading people to this this site, and it's sort of, in that case, it's sort of a gaming experience, right? But in our case, I think it's still a gray zone of what is possible using this technology, both in terms of people actually having access to the space. Fortunately, most of the campus is, it's private land, but there's no fences or walls that would prevent people from the community to come here and check it out. It gets a little grayer. We've considered doing some things inside of different campus buildings, which are generally unlocked most of the time, right? But not always. Sometimes you need a card to get in, etc. So we haven't really pushed on that yet. So I think it's an area where my perspective is, if there's a really meaningful story to be told on that land, we can push some of the boundaries this way, but still kind of TBD.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Yes.
This may be a red herring. The Ignatian Center has been working with community for many, many years and struggling with how to make sure that the interactions with communities in San Jose are not colonial or powered down thing. Is there any conversation across these different projects? And I hesitate to bring this up because that's more work, and you guys are doing plenty of work. You've got a lot of complexity to deal with already. But it seems to me that there might be something fruitful in conversations, like I think they could learn from you guys, and you might even be able to learn. But our whole experiential learning for social justice project has depended on that collaboration.
I think there's a lot of different areas of overlap there. I mean, there's a current task force, it's a fairly bureaucratic thing about writing the history of the university, and Megan and I and other people are on it, but Aaron from the Nation Center is also on it, so there's, Nation Center is involved in some of these conversations for sure. I've talked to Jasmine, who's the internship, or no, not internship, immersions coordinator over there about, or I gave a non-AR version of the tour, just a walking tour for one of the immersions this fall, but we talked about ways to incorporate the AR tour. Could there even be like a native Bay Area immersion that would be a 2 or 3 day kind of tour around important sites around the Bay and stuff. So yeah, I think it's all sorts of potential.
Great.
But yeah, more work.
It is more work.
It would be worth it.
Well, then please join me in thanking our speakers one more time. All to come on the 29th for Greg Whittemore's talk on slavery in Canada and the U.S. I also encourage you, on your way out, to grab yourself a dessert and potentially beverage. If you do not, I feed them to my students, and they develop the entirely wrong impression that I'm nice. So don't do that to them. Please take a dessert and thank you all for attending.